local district attorney offices have hired special units to investigate and prosecute those who commit crimes against older Americans and the disabled. One of the pioneers in this field was in San Diego, California. He is Paul Greenwood. He is the Deputy DA in San Diego, California, and he is head of the Elderly Prosecution Unit. I'd like to introduce right now Paul Greenwood, and with him is his lovely wife. Let's welcome Paul Greenwood.
Thank you so much, Don. Good morning to you all. It is an honor to be back in East Tennessee after 2 years and to look out at a packed ballroom from representing the whole of the state of Tennessee. I really appreciate your attendance. Something that the Lieutenant Governor said this morning describes each of us, and I like it. I wrote it down. He referred to you as soldiers against crime. And I never heard that phrase before, but that's how we should look at our role, because it is a war. And something that Professor McGuire said this morning really struck me too, that elder mistreatment is inevitable in a society that has a problem with ageism. And I see that every day. Can we put our slides up? Is that all right? Could you please? Is that okay? Thank you. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, my wife and I have fallen in love with East Tennessee. It has been a remarkable 4 days that we've been here. And it wouldn't have been possible without this wonderful organization, amongst other folks. And I really want to thank Elder Watch and this coalition for your 25 years dedication in this important role. And thank you for bringing me and my wife back to this beautiful part of the country. And here we are, the first ever statewide Elder Justice Conference. It's really remarkable, and it shows that this is a growing movement in this wonderful state. Why do I love this part of the world so much? I love Tennessee for many reasons. This is where, by the way, I'm talking an hour later with my wife, this is where we had our Saturday picnic lunch. It was amazing.
Oh gosh, okay. Looking out from, what's it called again? Thank you so much, darling. Clingman's Dome. And even look at it, doesn't matter. We had a half-mile journey uphill. Okay, this is part of ageism. My calves are killing me now. But don't worry, you have one on there. I just found it so exciting to stand on the AT, because that's what you call it, right? The AT. Some of you, yeah. And to read that the state line of North Carolina and Tennessee. So anyway, we just had a wonderful time, and then on Sunday to go to Cades. And to see a corn mill in operation, and to be able to get the corn flour and feed the hungriest fish in the world down there in the brook below. Yeah, just amazing. So thank you for allowing us that just wonderful opportunity. So there's me, and jurors do ask me how come a Brit ends up in San Diego for so many years prosecuting these crimes. And it's true love. I had the great blessing to be traveling around the United States in 1973 because my interest and my love of America started in 1969 when I watched 2 films, Midnight Cowboy and Easy Rider. It's true. And as a result, I decided to come over to America during my summer vacations out of law school. And so I came every summer, and in the summer of 1973, I hit the jackpot. I traveled through San Diego for 2 whole days, and on the Sunday morning, I decided to go to a Baptist church. I walked into a young adult Sunday school program, and the only empty seat was sitting right there next to this gorgeous young lady. So I sat down next to her, and I married her. I did, 5 years later. Darling, would you mind just standing up for a minute? Thank you. There she is. Thank you. She is the love of my life. She is the rock. She is the reason why I'm able to stand here. What I do, because it was so many years ago when we were in England. I was a young lawyer, and I was doing my cases in the criminal courts. Only spectator. All of the public gallery was my wife. And at the end of a case, she would turn to me and say, "You need a bigger stage." It's amazing. Broadway. That's my address, 330 West Broadway. So I tell people I work on Broadway. It's true. It worked very well, is it? I'm going to have to keep going back. Okay, so I have a daughter, Rebecca. She was 10 when we moved to America. She then moved back to London when she was 18. Guess what? She fell in love with a Brit. And so they live in London, and they have 2 daughters. They're twins, India and Eden. Don't ask me who's who. I have no clue. But they live there, and they're both my son-in-law and my daughter very heavily involved in social work. There they are, their first day of school this year in their uniforms. And then there's our son, Stephen. He is our 31-year-old single son, still looking for the love of his life. And so if you know anybody, let me know. So he's an entrepreneur, and he used to work for Discovery Channel, for Reddit, and now he's working on his own. He's formed a company because he's found what he says is going to be the next best thing for all of us. Do you know what it is? Underwater virtual reality, okay? So in about 5 years' time, you will be floating down that lazy river, and you will put on your face a mask, and it'll all be because of Stephen Greenwood, okay? I just want you to know that. In 5 years' time, that's what it will be. So I've been prosecuting crimes against seniors for 21 years, and people ask me all the time, how come you've done it for so long? And I say primarily 2 reasons, and there they are, my mum and my dad. I like showing this photo to young male law students and say, this is how you should dress on your first date. Boy, how times have changed. My parents, wife's parents, have been an inspiration to me, and they were married for over 60 years. My mother is still alive. She's 94. One thing I've learned about what I do and about how people become victims of this crime, the primary reason is isolation. Developed through loneliness and one of those Ds that the professor talked about, depression. My mother became a widow 2.5 years ago, but actually she became lonely about 6 years ago when our father was diagnosed fully with advanced dementia, Alzheimer's, and we made the very difficult decision to place him in an Alzheimer's facility 24/7. My mother was alone for the first time in 6 years, and so because of what I had learned over the last 13 or 14 years, I said to my mother, here's my commitment to you, Mom. You're living alone for the first time in your life. I live 6,000 miles away. I don't get to see you very often. What I'll do is this, though. I promise, wherever possible, I will phone you every single morning. And that worked pretty well for 3.5 years. But then after my father died, the phone calls, until they finally stopped. And very rarely in the last 2.5 years have we ever spoken to my mother on the phone. Because I bought her a mini iPad. So every morning at 6:59, Monday through Friday, ask. Because if it gets to 7:01, my 94-year-old mother is on her mini iPad FaceTiming us. You okay? Has there been an earthquake? Has North Korea dropped that bomb on you yet? That's what she says. On weekend, dispensation. Why is it so important to me to be able to FaceTime my mother every morning? It's because I get to see her. We get to see her face. We get to see how she's responding to questions. We get to see what she's been doing in her day, because from West Coast, it's 8-hour time difference. She's already at 3 p.m. by the time I FaceTime her at 6:50. So we get to know whether she's been to the supermarket, whether she needs her medications, whether the doctor's been, and whether she's had any random phone calls from her grandson telling her he's in prison in Colombia. And whether the IRS is after her for her back payment of taxes. And so we constantly are able to talk every single day. Why this is so important for all of us is because I get countless phone calls from family members angry. They call me because they've just discovered that their mother has been a victim of financial elder abuse, and they want me to go after the suspect and prosecute that person. And I let them go on, and then I suddenly interrupt, and I say, excuse me, where were you when all this was going on? And you know what they do? They give me every excuse under the sun. Well, I'm 150 miles away. So what, I say. Well, I'm busy. So what? I've got kids. I've got a job. What about Mother's Day? Were you there? Well, no. Were you there on Thanksgiving? Well, actually, no. That's exactly what predators find, don't they? They find victims who are alone, whose family have stopped caring until the inheritance starts evaporating. Then they get angry. So please, I would urge you, pass this on. Buy mini iPads for your older family members. It works. It really does. A picture of my father before he passed away. I can't say enough about the dedicated staff at this facility where he was. He was well taken care of. I know there's a bad image for assisted living and skilled nursing, and many people fear the prospect of being placed there. But for my dad, it was the right thing, although I have to tell you, it did not hurt that the day one when he was put into the facility, I was there with my mother, and I introduced myself to the administrator, said, hi, I'm Ron's son, and by the way, here's my business card. It's not bad to have in big font, elder abuse prosecutor, okay? I got a kick last week. My mother said, oh, I've run out of your cards. Can you send some more? Because she gives them out to everybody who comes to the door. It's brilliant. Hi, yes. Oh, you're a solicitor? Oh, right, here's this. But you know what? This is how I think of my dad. My dad, I discovered at the age of 7, was a true hero. A B-25 bomber pilot in World War II, flew 7. On mission number 6, he crash-landed into the Adriatic after being shot down, and the aircraft sunk 50 feet below the waves. And just like in that movie Dunkirk, where the Spitfire pilot had problems getting out of the cockpit, my dad's cockpit jammed. And at one moment, he honestly thought he was not going to survive. And in that moment, he cried out a little thought and prayer. He said, Lord, if I survive this, because he knew he wanted to be a teacher after the war. He said, if I survive this and if I get into education, I'm going to make sure that every kid that I teach knows how to swim. And you know what? He was the first principal in southern England to build a swimming pool in an elementary school in southern England. He was truly a remarkable pioneer, and that's why I do what I do in his memory and to give thanks to my parents. So I work in the DA. My wife and I moved from England, where we'd been for 13 years, to San Diego in 1991. I am living proof. Cagney and Lacey, Hill Street Blues, Streets of San Francisco and LA Law. You too could pass the California bar at the first attempt. I don't know how I did it, but that's, I think, down to all the TV programs that I watched, which I loved. So I worked there. This is my boss, Summer Stephan. She's the newly appointed boss. And she's a wonderful prosecutor. She's a prosecutor's prosecutor. She's my new boss, but I'm also very protective of her. So whatever comes out of my mouth, please don't blame her. Please blame me, okay? All right. So I work in the DA's office. We have a family protection division. And in that family protection division, we prosecute crimes against young children for child abduction, child molestation. We then have a separate subdivision for domestic violence and partner crime, and then built in the elder and dependent adult abuse subunit, which I've had the privilege of heading up for the last 21 years. One thing I've learned about older adults coming to court is they don't mind coming to court as long as they do not miss their soaps. Now, I'm being ageist here, I know that, but I'm sorry. You know, they love their soaps. And so we have now converted the room for a special comfortable room for them to watch their TV programs before they come into court. I've also learned this. We use support animals for victims who are vulnerable, young children, older adults. This program became inspired by her office, and she had a service animal, and she came to us. She said, "Why use these with your vulnerable victims?" It's been amazing. The defense bar has objected to it, but the Court of Appeal has ruled in our favor time and time again. And I can't tell you, I've seen so many times where we've had victims come who are almost paralyzed with fear. But when we introduce them to one of these dogs, that fear dissipates. We allow them to hold the leash. They walk down to the courtroom with that dog. They feel emboldened and empowered. The dog sits at their feet in the witness box, and they are not afraid to face their predator and point them out. It's amazing. And the other thing I found is that dog therapy is good for all of us. And you know, when I've come back from court, maybe a decision has not gone my way, I feel infuriated. Instead of whining to a colleague, I go and these animals. The beauty is they listen, and they understand, and then they lick you. It's wonderful. It only began in January of 1996. I wasn't looking for this. I did not know elder abuse was a problem. I didn't know it was a crime. I didn't know the code section. I didn't know anything about elder abuse until suddenly one day the phone rang. The boss was on the phone, said, "Come to my office." And I thought, oh boy, who have I upset? What's going on? They sat me down and said, "Greenwood, we want you to begin a new prosecution work called elder abuse." I ask a lot of questions. And I said, "Excuse me, what is that?" And nobody could give me an answer other than to say, "Go talk to Adult Protective Services." And that's all they told me. Other than, I asked them a second question, "Do I have a manual?" They said, "No, you're going to have to yourself." Well, I still haven't done that yet, because I'm still learning from all the mistakes I make. But one day, maybe we will. But it's been a fascinating journey. So what did they give me? This. The prosecutor needs this. But there was one nagging problem. Nobody was bringing me any cases. And as you know, in prosecutors' offices, we rely upon law enforcement to bring us cases. And it was so ironic. I was sitting in a busy division where I was surrounded by other prosecutors doing child abuse, domestic violence, and the detectives were coming past my office and dropping off cases for them. And I was looking out going, please, would somebody give me a case? But nobody was. All I had to deal with was silence. This has been the biggest challenge for me over the last 21 years, is how do you overcome this? And I like this poster, because I think for us here in Tennessee, it's the same challenge. How do you, as a soldier against crime, overcome of silence, which is predominantly brought in by the victims themselves? Canada said it well. They talked about elder abuse thriving on silence. The time has come in Tennessee to bring this out into the open. In the summer, the National Association of Attorney Generals came out publicly and said, we finally recognize that elder abuse is a massive problem in the United States of America, and they decided to make it one of their primary platforms. This is the National Association of State Attorney Generals. The president this year is from Kansas, Attorney General Derek Schmidt, and this is what he was quoted. Elder abuse called the silent epidemic. It operates in the shadows. It is our challenge. How do we bring this ugly topic out of the shadows into the focus, into the limelight, into the courtroom? How do we do that? One of the ways I have found was that I needed to change my whole philosophy of what it means to be a prosecutor. Because you see, I've seen this over the last 25 years in my office. We are not taught to be proactive as prosecutors. We are spoon-fed with cases. I remember that until I was given this assignment, I never had a day without a case. Robberies, drugs cases, physical assaults. They kept coming. I didn't have to ask for them. After 3 weeks of training, the first few weeks on the job, they handed me my first 10 cases. Said, go off and prosecute. But when I started this new assignment, there were none of those. I had to change my whole philosophy, not be reactive, because there was nothing to react to. I had to go out and be proactive. And you know one of the first things I learned? You get out in the community and you start listening, you will hear things. And you know where I found the best place to hear things? Mobile home parks. Do you have any in Tennessee? Because we do in San Diego. And I found that seniors often live in mobile home parks. And so when I started going out and talking to the senior mobile home park manager and say, hey, can I just hang out in your community room at 12 noon? And can you tell all the residents that I'll be there? And if they want to come and chat, hey, I'm there. I got 25, 30, 35 seniors coming in with a whole variety of problems. And then they'd start telling me, Mr. Greenwood, do you know what's going on in Space 72? Because I didn't realize in mobile home parks, you don't have a unit, you have a space. Did you know that? It's always space something. And they started telling me about the grandson who was living illegally in Space 72 and bringing all his drug friends over, holding grandma prisoner in the back of the mobile home unit. I said, well, why hasn't this been told to the sheriff? Nobody wanted to make that call, but they were willing to come and talk. I learned a lot. So I went around the county. We have an interesting large county in San Diego. Those of you who visited to the north, we're separated from on the left side, we're separated by a big block of water. On the right side, we're separated from Imperial County by a desert. And down below, there's something, I think, called a wall, or something like that, separating us from another country. And in between, there is cities, there's towns, there's rural areas, and it's just a hodgepodge of different types of communities. But we're served by about 19 different law enforcement agencies who all have separate trainings and protocols. I learned a lot. And what I learned as I went around, as I talked to adult protective services, and I talked to people in mobile home parks and day centers, I started hearing horrible stories. And I would say, well, what happened to the suspect? And the answer was typically the same, nothing. And I started to learn what the professor has so eloquently told us, that many reasons are because of ageism, because of biases. Some are just implicit. They're not deliberate, but they're embedded in us as to how we look at older adults, how we view their reliability, how we view their credibility. And I realized this is my time to try to make a difference. So I started to learn all this as to what the crime of elder abuse is. I'm still learning every single day, 21 years later. But it's so predictable because of human nature. Human nature is predictable. And that's why I love what I do, because I can often anticipate what evidence I need to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. For example, the number one thing that people steal from elders is typically the same: jewelry. So what's the first thing I ask my detectives to do? Go look at the jewelry box. Go look at every pawn shop in town. See if this suspect's name appears in the last 3 months in pawn shops as having deposited this item. What do many of my suspects buy when they steal the elders' money? I'll tell you what they buy. They buy the 65-inch flat-screen TV from Costco and Best Buy. It's so predictable. It's escalating. And we know it's escalating because of those demographics. Do you realize that by the year 2030, there will be over 70 million people in this country driving Buicks? I'm sorry to stereotype my elderly friends, but 95% own a Buick. 3% own a Camry, and 2% own a 1992 Cadillac de Seville, white exterior, tan interior. You've heard this before. Every day, today, you know how many people turn 65? 10,000. We're all living longer, as the professor said. There will be, in less than 3 years, over 250,000 people in this country who are 100. If you don't believe me, turn on NBC any weekday. Did you know that if you eat Smuckers for breakfast, you will live to be 100? My favorite centenarian is this lady, though. I almost fear showing this in front of the professor. Sorry, professor. I mean, I don't know. I just think it's great. She was 103. She's from England. She was 103 when she died. She outlived 3 of her primary care physicians. And yet, despite this obvious escalation of the aging population, here's a sobering thought. This appeared on a federal agency's Twitter site. This is the Administration of Community Living, which I think do a phenomenal job. But this is what they said. Despite great progress, funding for elder justice is 1% of funding for children and family welfare. Now, doesn't that put it all in perspective? If there's something that we can say to our legislature, and Lieutenant Governor General, he said, tell us, this is something that needs to be said loud and clear. If you count up the number of Child Protective Services workers in Tennessee, and you then put that list against the list of how many Adult Protective Services workers are, it's ridiculous. But that's not foreign to Tennessee. That's across this whole country. We need to be honest and say we have failed this segment of our population. And we need to beef up the resources immediately for adult protective services. For me, it's logical. It's the reason why we've got to do more, and your voice can count in that way. We've got to find funding somehow. So it's exploding because of demographics, because we don't yet have cure for dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's diseases. And many of my victims are in the early to moderate stages of these various shocking diseases. The problem that victims are silent, don't report. And then what scares me most is who is taking care of your seniors, of your elders in Tennessee. If they're anything like the ones in San Diego, we have to be really careful. One of the very first cases I ever prosecuted was this one. She was a parolee out of Nevada. She was a thief, convicted, spent 3 years in penal correction center in Nevada, came to San Diego, could not work in a department store because they did a background check. She went to an agency, a caregiver agency, whose idea of a background check was self-disclosure. They gave her a form. Question 7 on page 1, have you ever been convicted of a felony? When I showed this rap sheet to the owner of the agency, and then compare that with her answer, the defendant's answer to the question, this is the reaction of the administrator. She went, oh, she lied. Duh! You see, as soldiers against this crime, you know that felons lie, right? It's natural for them to lie. We have got to do a far better job of doing background checks on those who we entrust with our seniors. You have to add in the fears that so many of our seniors have. One of the biggest fears that I've come across with my victims is they fear that they're going to lose their independence. They've told me that time and time again, and I gently say, how come you didn't report this when you found out? Well, Mr. Greenwald, I would rather lose $50,000 than run the risk of losing my independence, because I think that you and the other governmental agencies would have taken me out of my home and put me in a nursing home. I hear that time and time again. That is further reinforced by the suspects who know this, and they will threaten the victim by saying, okay, you found out, but here's your choice. You can call the police right now, they'll arrest me, but who's going to take care of you? Oh, I know what's going to happen. The police will take you to that assisted living down the road. That's what they tell my victims. And most of my victims fall for it, and they're too afraid to call and make a report. So who are my victims? Well, as you heard today from the Lieutenant Governor, you have new laws. There's 3 of them, and I won't repeat what he told you, but these are the 3 that he explained to you this morning, and it's very exciting that they are now implemented. The governor signed them into law. And one of the senators, when I was doing my research before coming here, I found out that one of the senators was Mark Norris, who was very instrumental in getting these laws passed. So I called his office on Friday morning, and I asked to speak to a legislative aide. I gave them my number, and 15 minutes later, the phone call came in, and it was Senator Norris himself. I was so touched by the fact that he took the call and made it to me, and he was touched that a West Coast prosecutor found out about his law. And so we had a wonderful chat for a few minutes. So SB 1230 is what became law. And there is the signing ceremony, and it's called Fighting Financial Exploitation of the Elderly and Vulnerable Adults. Very exciting. So this is a step in the right direction for the whole of the state of Tennessee, getting these kinds of laws passed. The formal title is called Elder and Vulnerable Adults Protection Act. And then there's SB 1267, you may want to write that one down. And there's the signing ceremony for that one, which helps banks protect their customers and credit unions protect their members. And Tennessee, through these laws, have defined their victims as elders. Now, at first, they decided that the definition of an elder would be anyone over the age of 65. But an amendment was made, and now in Tennessee, under this bill, this act, the definition of an elder is anyone over the age of 70. Now, I couldn't be happier. I'll tell you why. Because in March of this year, I did turn 65. And I do not like being called an elder. In fact, last week, I went in front of the judge and I said, Your Honor, I've been dreading this day for years. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, Your Honor, I'm coming before you with my first ever case of elder abuse, where my victim is younger than myself. And I do not like it. So I like 70. You are only one of 3 states that defines an elder as 70 or over. The other 2 are Kansas and Colorado. But you know I'm pushing for Governor Brown in California to change this. And I think he will, because he's like, what is he? I mean, 70, 78, isn't he? Or something like that. He's older. So I like this. I like this a lot. You also have, under these acts, the definition that includes vulnerable adults. And this is very important, as it is for me, because we prosecute crimes against 65 and older and 18 through 64 with physical or mental disabilities. Thank you. And this is the definition in Tennessee. What I want to address now, and by the way, you've been so generous to me to give me this length of time. We're not having a formal break, and I totally understand it as and when you need to get up, stretch your legs, use the restroom or whatever. So don't feel that I'm going to call you out or be uncomfortable. No, I just want you to feel comfortable to be able to do that at any time, but I'm going to plow through until 1 minute before 12. Is that all right? Okay. I want to talk now about misconceptions. These misconceptions often hinder successful discovery of evidence, often hinder investigations, and ultimately hinder prosecution. You see, it's important that we prosecute these cases on a number of bases. We want justice for our victims, we want accountability for our defendants, and thirdly, we want data to support our arguments that we need more adult protective services because this crime is going through the roof. And why do I say that? Because that's the first question I ever get asked by a journalist, whether it be from the New York Times, from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, or whatever it is. They asked me, how many cases has your office prosecuted in the last year? They want hard numbers. When I go to Sacramento, that's exactly what the legislature wants. Okay, Mr. Greenwood, you're calling it an epidemic. You're calling it, well, some people have called it the silver tsunami. Whatever you want to call it. Prove it. That's what they tell me. Prove it. How come? And if I told them and said, well, we've prosecuted 3 cases in a year, that would not go down very well. So I'm not driven by numbers, I'm driven by evidence. But I'm also driven by getting people to look for the evidence, to bring to us that we can then hopefully convert into real cases that we can then present to the legislature as proof that this is a rising tide. But misconceptions block those investigations. This was an article that came out of North Carolina, your next door neighbor. And whenever I read articles on elder abuse on the internet, often the headline is a pessimistic headline, and I don't like it. And this is a classic example. Look at it. It says, cases of elder abuse hard to prosecute. If too many police officers and if too many prosecutors read that, they will buy into it. My experience is totally different. The majority of cases that I prosecuted, from homicide to rape to robbery to financial exploitation to neglect to false imprisonment to mental infliction of elder abuse, the majority of those cases are not difficult to prosecute. In fact, the hardest cases I've ever prosecuted were as a misdemeanor trial attorney when I first started doing DUI misdemeanor jury trials where the blood alcohol level was 0.08 or 0.09. And the driver passed the field sobriety test. Those are tough cases to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Most of these cases are not tough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt because jurors get it. Because jurors have older relatives in their family. But for whatever reason, we have bought into this philosophy that these are hard to bring to court. This article talks about, in paragraph 3, frustrations that people feel. Nothing ever happens to these people, said one private attorney. You steal from one, and you move to the next. People are sitting ducks here. What was the response of the elected district attorney? Many suspects haven't been arrested and prosecuted because there is no proof. And I took a look at that, and I looked at it again, and I thought, what? There is no proof? I don't believe that. Do you believe that? There is always some proof, surely, in most allegations. The test is there enough proof beyond a reasonable doubt for a DA to issue a case? The article went on and said, this is the prosecutor saying, there has been talk and reports, but not one case has been charged and indicted because we haven't had evidence. We haven't had evidence. I can ask you, and I think you know the answer. Why did he say they hadn't had evidence? Exactly. What did you just say? They didn't look for it. That's exactly right, Janet. They didn't bother to look for it. It's as simple as that, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? I've learned in 21 years that there's always some evidence, but if you don't bother to look for it, it ain't there. The biggest misconception as to why detectives were never bringing me any cases for several months was this one. Because what I decided to do, when the cases weren't coming to me, I thought, well, I'll get out there and I'll start going to the police stations and the sheriff stations around the county. And so they invited me to come. Boy, do they get up early, police officers. I said, what time's your roll call? 6:30. What, in the evening? No, in the morning. What? So I'd have to end up going out there sometimes at 6:30 in the morning and facing these wonderful uniformed police officers and talk to them. And I would ask, look, I said, I'm dying out here. I need cases. Why don't you bring me any cases? And this is what they told me. Greenwood, you don't want to touch these cases. Why not? Apparently, elderly people make terrible witnesses. And you talk about a classic example of ageism. That is it, right? And I was intrigued. I said, tell me, give me an example of why you think a 95-year-old witness would be an ineffective witness for me. And what's the answer they give me? Because they're so what? They're all old, which means that if they're old, they are forgetful. Yeah, you've forgotten already the answer. Yeah, forgetful. They're so forgetful. That's what I was hearing all over the place. Greenwood, how can you prosecute a case when your victim is going to be forgetful? Well, I've learned this. Don't you agree? I tell you what, I'd rather have a 95-year-old witness on the witness stand than a 21-year-old male from Pacific Beach. And you get him on the witness stand at 8:30 on a Monday morning after a partying weekend in Pacific Beach. He won't remember anything. And every other word is dude anyway. Very ineffective. But I've learned that witnesses of a certain age, the majority of them do remember these things. And why is that? Because so many of them, something happens to them out of the ordinary. Because their lives are less cluttered than other people's lives. And when something happens, like phone calls, letters, people coming to the door, they remember it. And then I also found out that they write it down. And you know what they write it down on? That rectangular notepad that the realtor leaves. And then they stick it with a magnet on the refrigerator door. So I have something for them to refresh their memories by when they are testifying in the courtroom. Most of them are very accurate historians. But these are all mischaracterizations of what happens to you when you become older, except one. There is one that I've noticed in all these descriptions of adjectives that is pretty accurate, and it's number 3. Oh, my goodness. I get so many calls from seniors who get my name finally from somebody else. Mr. Greenwood. Yes. Oh, finally, I've been on the phone all morning, and they push me around from place to place, and then finally somebody told me to call you. Mr. Greenwood, I want to tell you my story. No, you're not. But this is what we'll do. I'll give you 10 minutes. I'm going to ask you about 25 questions in that 10 minutes, and you're going to keep your answers short. And if you don't, I'm going to interrupt you. Is that all right? Because they don't have a choice. I've learned that 95% of what they want to tell me is totally irrelevant to what I need to know. Because you see, in law enforcement, in prosecutors' offices, we are in the business of gathering evidence, and we have to gather evidence that fits within certain elements of a crime. And if those elements are not there, we have no crime that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. For example, one element of the crime of elder abuse that I have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt is that my victim is over the age of 65. So that's my first question. Excuse me, how old are you? And then we move from there. Are you a victim? Yes. Of what? Is it financial? Yes. What is it that you believe has been taken from you without your permission? And then they tell me. Who took it? Then they tell me. Who is this person? How long have you known them? Where did you meet them? What relationship have you had with them? And by the time we finish the 10 minutes, I have a pretty good understanding of whether or not I have a victim, whether it's a crime, which jurisdiction it occurred in, and which law enforcement agency I'm going to now make sure that this person gets treated properly by. But that's what I think we need to do. These are all otherwise misconceptions. These are 4 of my victims. Now you know why I love this job. Look at them. Do you think they have jury appeal? Oh my goodness, do they ever? They were all victims of my Rooter defendant. Have you heard of Rooter? Okay, by the way, this is not the crook. I don't know who this guy is. I borrowed him from their website, so don't tell on me, will you? But he was working for Rooter, but then they fired him for dishonesty, but they forgot to ask for the return of his uniform. So one day he's unemployed and he decides, oh, I've got to go and rip off some seniors. He puts on the plumbing uniform and drives over to a retirement community called Mount Miguel Covenant Village. And because he's in his plumbing uniform, he goes over to the independent living, he goes over to the independent living part of this retirement community. He avoids the skilled nursing part and the assisted living part because he knows there'll be staff members there. The independent, there's no staff around. He knocks on their doors, and this is how he gets in. He says, good morning, management has sent me. There's a problem with your plumbing. May I please come in? And that's how he gets in. Then he directs them to the rear bathroom, asks them to turn on the hot and cold taps while he's in the living area, and you know what he's doing, stealing whatever he can. Now, I have to let you into a little secret. When I started 21 years ago, my colleagues in my office made fun of me. Prosecutors have a weird sense of humor. They tease one another. And we do. And they made fun of my assignment, elder abuse. Who have you upset in the office, is what I was being told. And I'll tell you who did that most of all. It was the gang prosecutors. Now, you can always tell a gang prosecutor because they walk differently. Actually, they don't walk, they swagger. Because they deal with the toughest cases, and they've earned it. But they do have a bit of an attitude. And they would come up to me, hey, Greenwood, you know. And they would mock me they said, oh, I bet you're going to spend all your time in nursing homes drinking hot tea with elderly women. What fun. But you know what? They don't mock me anymore. Because I've actually gained a little bit of credibility because of the kind of cases that I've prosecuted, which have attracted media attention. And now I love it, because when I'm in the elevator with my victim, and look at the bottom right victim here, I'm going to call her Agnes, because 95% of all my female victims are called Agnes, okay? She's 5'4", she's got the most adorable smile, and into the elevator walks my gang prosecutor friend with his victim. Exactly, you can picture his victim. He's 22. Why is he a victim of a gang crime? Well, let me guess. Oh, yeah, he was a member of the rival gang. What does he look like? Tattoos on his knuckles, on his neck, saggy trousers, hands are in his pockets, eye contact was at the floor, but the best part of all, he's wearing that jacket. That jacket, which he's going to walk into that San Diego courtroom, and those jurors are going to see it, and it's going to go down really well with those jurors. You know what it's called? It's called an Oakland Raiders jacket. San Diego jurors are upset because we've lost our football team, and now in comes a member of the rival team, Oakland Raiders. My gang prosecutor friend looks at me, and Agnes looks at him. She goes, good morning, young man. You know what he's thinking? Oh, Greenwood, can I borrow Agnes for 5 minutes? Because he knows I'm about to introduce her to my jury. And this is the part that I love. I walk in, I know that Agnes is sitting outside, she's my next witness, and I say, good morning, Your Honor, good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Your Honor, people are ready to call their next witness, Agnes Smith. In she walks, she takes the oath from the other side of the gate. I'm standing the other side of the gate, the witness box is over there. I'm expecting her to walk right past, but she doesn't. She walks to me, and she links arms with me. Oh, perfect. Now I get to walk her slowly past the jury box. And on the way, Agnes turns to these 12 strangers. And what does she do? She smiles. And she says, good morning. By the time Agnes gets into the witness box, 4 of my jurors want to adopt her as their grandmother. This is why I love my job. This is why elder abuse cases typically are not hard to prosecute. Last year, these were all victims of one case, of one defendant. Count them, there's 7 of them. There were 13 in total, but on this day when they were testifying, 3 had medical issues and the other 3 were on cruises. Classic. But at least I had 7. The defendant was the maintenance guy in their facility. And guess what he'd stolen from each of them? I've already mentioned it to you. Jewelry! These ladies could not wait to come to court to testify against him. I knew going into court that I had a solid case. I had these phenomenal victims waiting to testify, and I was able to tell the judge and the public defender beforehand, because the judge asked me, "What is your offer, Mr. Greenwood?" I said, 10 years, stipulated prison. He's going to plead to 4 residential burglaries. And the judge goes, "Whoa, that's tough." I said, "Your Honor, you haven't seen my witnesses, have you?" The defense attorney kind of like blew it off, said, "Absolutely no way. My client's got no prior record. You cannot expect him to go to prison for 10 years. I said, "Oh, yes, we can." So then he was in the courtroom. I was outside. I came out to these ladies to tell them that the offer had been rejected. And I said, "By the way, ladies, I never asked you, what do you think he should get?" And I was expecting some of them to say 15 years, 8 years, 3 years. None of them mentioned prison. To a person, they described for me what they wanted to do to him. So I said, "Hold that thought." I went in the courtroom and I said to my public defender colleague, "You better come out. I need you to hear what these ladies just said they wanted to do to your client." And I said, "I don't want to be responsible for anything that happens when they testify, okay?" So I said, "Ladies, tell him what you just told me." The color drained out of his face. He looked at me and said, "Paul, give me 10 minutes. He went back in. 15 minutes later, he came out with a signed change of plea form stipulating to 10 years in prison and 4 felony counts. You know, it works. It absolutely works. Power in the witnesses who are there. And recently, and this is my chief investigator who's with me, he's my wingman, he's a phenomenal, Gary is his name. This was a 92-year-old victim. She had jewelry and checks stolen from her by her caregiver. The interesting thing is that the person who discovered the theft was not her, it was her son. The interesting thing about that is her son is a high-profile criminal defense lawyer in my jurisdiction, against whom I've been up on several prior elder abuse cases. Isn't it interesting that when it's your own mother, it takes on a whole different perspective? You see, I get a lot of criticism in my office and from the public defense bar for filing residential burglary charges. He was the first one to say, "I hope you're going to file a residential burglary charge," coming out of the mouth of a defense attorney. But this because it meant a lot to him, because it was his 92-year-old mother, who was another phenomenal witness. Here is a recent victim of a sexual assault. She's 100 years old, and I want to play very briefly part of what she told my colleague. Oh, I hope I can. Can you turn up the volume, please?
Came in, male or female? And when you came out of the bathroom, you saw that the male person was in the room. What happened now?
The man was dead, and he pushed him down in the bed and he brought him down, but he was going to the highway.
Do you remember if he pushed you on the side of the bed, or were you at the foot of the bed and he pushed you back?
I was in the middle of the day. I was in the middle of that theater. And that's where I sat on the bed, because that's where I was getting into the bed.
Her bravery, the way she was able to articulate what happened to her, 100 years old. And because of her testimony, the defendant decided he did not want to risk a trial, and he pled after she testified. So that's a 100-year-old victim. Number 2 on my list is this one. If my elderly victim refuses to provide information, I'm being told, that's it, Greenwood. We have a hostile, we have an uncooperative, a reluctant victim. Let's close our investigation. No, I say no. We shouldn't do that. For example, I guarantee you there are victims looking like this in Tennessee this morning. Somewhere in Tennessee last night, a son got into an argument with his elderly mother and punched her in the eye. And he may or may not have been arrested. But if he was arrested, he may then have done a collect call from jail this morning to his mother and berated her. Look what you've done. This is going to make everything bad. I'm in a cell with a rapist. The DA, I know, is going to come after me and try to get me in prison for 25 years. It's all your fault. And sometimes the victim will believe it and will then try to undo what's been done. And by the time the police go back and interview her, what does she say? I don't want anything to do with this. I don't want to help. I can't remember what happened. And we lose a lot of evidence that way. This lady was upset with me because I prosecuted her son, and I told her that I was going to ask for 6 years in prison. And I told her the reason was because he had a prior conviction called a strike under California law, which enables me to double the sentence that he would normally have got. And she was so angry. Let me tell you what he was previously convicted of: killing his own brother, her other son. You would think that she would be happy that I'm now prosecuting her son who killed her firstborn. In fact, he did this to his mother soon after coming out of prison, after serving 21 years. But no, this is her logic. She said, Mr. I've already lost one son. If you now do what you're threatening to do and put my son away for 6 years, I'm going to lose my only other child, and I don't want that to happen. But I have to do what I believe is in the best interest of justice and what is in the best interest of the people of the state of California, and that sometimes means doing what I did in this case: tread on the wishes of my victim. I try to do it with as much humanity and compassion as I can, but I still have to do it. We've learned from domestic violence that we can still prove these cases even when we have reluctant victims. Because this is what I've learned over 21 years. Self-determination by victims does not win. We cannot allow victims to tell you and I what they want to happen. And the 3 words that I dread most in any police report are these. If you ever see these 3 words in a crime report in Tennessee, I hope you'll bring it to the attention of the advocates. I have a victim advocate in my office whose primary job is to look at every single police report that is generated in the prior week. And she always brings out the reports where the alleged victim is over the age of 65. She reads the report, and in the final paragraph, if it says, case closed because victim declines prosecution, she brings me the report and says, I've got another one for you. So what do? I call the police officer who wrote that report. I gently talk to them, and I say, you know what? I'm sorry, but we have to keep this investigation going, whether or not the victim wants us to or not. If there's evidence, we've got to pursue the evidence wherever it takes us. Because if we do not do this, what is likely to happen? What message am I sending to the suspect? It's fine to do it. I can smack my mother tomorrow and get away with it. And what I found in the past, in the homicides that I've prosecuted of older mothers and fathers, Typically, you can trace back unreported, uninvestigated, unprosecuted prior incidents of physical abuse. And that's what scares me most, is that I miss a case that should have been prosecuted, which then 6 months later ends up with a homicide. In a case last year that was brought to me, there was a reference made to an incident in 2008 involving the same victim and the same suspect. I asked my victim advocate, can you find the 2008 incident? Because there's nothing in the criminal record here. I don't know why he wasn't prosecuted. Let's find out. And she got me the report. And look what it says at the very bottom. This case non-prosecutable. It will be cancelled. Victim declined to prosecute. For those of you from law enforcement, number one, thank you for being here. Number two, please, I beg you, tell everybody in your agency, do not write this in any report. And when people challenge me about this, I say, okay, how many homicide victims get to decline prosecution? And I know I'm being facetious, but you get the point, right? How many 5-year-old child molest victims get to decline to prosecute? Pressing charges is not the responsibility of victims. In fact, if we put the responsibility on victims, do you know what it does to them? It puts them in greater danger. Because when suspects believe that the decision-making is going to be that of the victim, they will apply as much pressure as they can on the victim from jail or from elsewhere to make that happen. So whenever I'm in court to arraign a son, I will always take the opportunity to address the son through the judge. Your Honor, I would like the defendant to know that his mother and I talked this morning. His mother did not want me to file charges against him, but I am making that decision. And if the defendant is upset with anybody, he needs to be upset with me and my office and not with his mother. This was a case that came to me in which the detective brought it to me and I filed charges. But I highlighted the last sentence because the detective interviewed the victim called Mr. McLean, and look what the detective said. I asked McLean if he wants to press charges. So I called the detective, and first of all, I thanked him for the great work he had done, but then I couldn't resist it. I said, Detective, I have to ask you, why on earth did you ask this question? And then I said, I have to also ask you this. What would have happened if Mr. McLean, in response to your question, had said no? And he says, well, you know what would have happened. Well, tell me. He said, you would never have seen this case. I said, well, do me a favor, detective. Please don't ever ask any elderly victims again in any case that you're investigating that same question. Because I don't want to know it. It's not relevant. All that is relevant is there evidence that I can display to a jury to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt? And I know this doesn't sit well with some of you, and I apologize, but this is what I've learned as a lawyer over 39 years, that if we start discriminating between cases as which we file and which we don't file based upon victims' wishes, it is going to end up in a heap of trouble. Back to North Carolina. This is what the chief said in a place called Hendersonville. Hendersonville police officers always respond to calls, treating potential victims with compassion and dignity. That's fantastic. I love it. But then look what happens in the second sentence. We, the police, charge when the charges are there to be made, and if we have a willing victim. If we have, the police chief makes a condition. If we have a willing victim. How many cases of domestic violence do you think get prosecuted in that jurisdiction? Because in San Diego, I would say at least 45% of our victims in domestic violence are not willing. North Carolina again, second paragraph, out of 26 cases, suspects were arrested in 12. In 3 cases, the victim did not press charges. This is dangerous, and I hope that this philosophy can be eradicated if it exists in Tennessee. It exists in San Diego, and we have to keep putting out those fires and encouraging police officers not to fall into this trap. Because if we don't prosecute, my experience with human nature says we send a green light to the suspect and they will do it again. Let me just briefly tell you about who is doing most of the physical abuse. It is a son. He lives in your jurisdiction. And those of you who work in social services, you will recognize him from this description. Why am I so confident in saying that? It's because this is what human nature is all about. This is his age. This is his situation. He's either divorced or single and never ever left home or just got released from jail. And in most cases, he's lazy and unemployed. How do I know that? Because when I talk to his mother, and I've read the police report, and it shows the suspect's classification as unemployed, I say to his mother, how come your 46-year-old son isn't working? She says, he tells me he has a medical condition. So let me guess, he's got a bad back. And she says, how did you know? So it comes from sitting on your sofa 8 hours a day playing video games. And I know, again, I'm being a little facetious, but it's true. They have convinced their mother that they would work if they could, but they're not able to. They have an addiction. You see it there. In order to feed their addiction, they steal from their mother. What's the first thing they steal? Jewelry, thank you. Then they move on to the checkbook and the debit card. But I have to tell you that some of the cases that I prosecute involve sons with mental illness, and I want you to know I treat those cases very differently. Because mental illness is a scourge on us all. These sons, in most cases, didn't invite the mental illness. Sometimes it is brought on by other external factors that they could have avoided, but in many cases, they did not seek it, and it's not their fault. But I still prosecute them because this is the only way that we can get them back on track. But custody is probably not the answer. We try to find mental health treatment programs that fits in with their situation. But I need to explain that to the mother and let her understand that this is our only hope for breaking the mental illness or breaking the addiction. In Tennessee, I found this from a wonderful lunch meeting I had with your district attorneys yesterday, and she showed me this poster, which I think is very, very good, very effective. What do you call someone who abuses an 80-year-old woman? She called him son. This is in Tennessee. It has the phone number to report suspected physical abuse. This is very good.
He came in and he just walked right up to me and he says, "You're dead, bitch," and he stabbed me in the stomach with an 8-inch blade. Then he turned on Don and he went in after Don. I called the police. I grabbed the phone, called the police. At first I thought he was joking. I thought he hit me with his fist.
He's coming to get us. We need a policeman. My son to conduct tonight. Okay, we're in 715 Gates Drive. Please hurry. He's back with a knife. After me.
Later, when Kenny was in jail, he called me and he said, he was just bawling. He says, "Mom, they told me I killed my dad." I said, "No, you didn't, but you tried." He doesn't remember. Doesn't remember it all. They gave him 18 and a half years, and he served about 9. Who knows, not make it to there. God, I don't know, but Don's gone. I'm stupid enough probably to try. I don't know. I'm a mother, and I love him. And I don't want him on the street, but I don't know what I'll do.
That's familiar, isn't it? I'm a mother, and I love him, and I don't want him on the street. That video was prepared by our son for his thesis on graduating from UCLA Film School. It was such an honor that he said, I want to do a documentary on elder abuse. And so I gave him several victims to talk to, and that was one of them that he went and talked to get her story. These are all pictures from cases that I prosecuted involving mothers and their sons, and they're very consistent injuries. This is a base of a beer bottle shoved into the eye. That's what it looks like. You always look for the abrasions around the chin and above the lips and then around the eye. Again, the abrasion around the eye. You look for the defensive wounds. When the mother is blocking the blows from her son, look for those wounds there. The dad who was attacked with the rim of a glass of beer shoved into his eye. The mother who was slapped on the face, and the police did a really good job here because they did that, and then I asked them, and they did this. They went back 3 days later, because 3 days later gives you the whole picture, because what happens 3 days later? Boom. And then you take a picture of the son. This is your classic bully, 52-year-old son, living in Knoxville, living in Nashville, living anywhere in Tennessee. I guarantee you he looks like this. And that's what we've got to be on the lookout for. The victim who's in a wheelchair, whose son dropped a dog on top of her, thankfully didn't break her wrist. But the legislation that I am able to prosecute under says, under circumstances likely to cause great bodily injury. And so I can get a felony conviction just for the minor injury. You look for the bruising on the wrists where he pulls her out of the bed. You look for the bruising on the arms. You look for the lady who's got skin tears from blood thinners, where the son grabs her and literally it comes off like that in his arms, in his hands. You look for the bruises on the neck. As a prosecutor, you have to show before and after pictures because they say so much more than words can. So you do that. You show not only the injury, but you show the sadness in her eyes. This was a tragic case. I'm about to show you a homicide picture, and I apologize for some of these pictures. In one sense, I apologize. If you're offended, I'm sorry, but this is what I deal with every day, and this is what is reality. This is life. And this lady could be living in your street. She's a volunteer, she's a widow, but she has, what is the problem? A son who lives at home with her. She lived in this neighborhood. Every night, the neighbors on either side of her heard the arguments. They heard the foul language, how he was verbally abusing his mother. They were so concerned for mother that they made the call to Adult Protective Services. APS do an unannounced visit. They knock on the door, she opens the door. And she says, "Thank you so much for paying an interest. I'm fine, please go away." She doesn't even let them in. They leave with a very heavy heart, knowing that this is not a good sign. Things get worse. Because you see, the son is angry with his mother constantly. He starts to write things down. He writes her name. He uses curse words. And she gets so afraid. You know what she does? She goes to her local library and borrows a law book on how to evict a tenant. She writes the letter. It's a legal letter. This is a mother writing to her son, but you would never know it. "You are hereby notified." Mothers don't write in that kind of language, but she did. And she was so afraid of him, she didn't want to confront him, so she left it in his bedroom while he was out. 7 days after she wrote that letter, she's dead. And I'll briefly show you the scene. He bludgeons her to death with a statue. Now you know you finally hit the pinnacle of your career when Nancy Grace mentions your case. That's it. It's downhill from now on, but that's okay.
Tonight, to San Diego, Mom went out for a morning walk she's never seen again. 8 days later, she's found face down, dead, in a field that is 35 miles from her home. The whole family immediately points the finger at the prime suspect, her own daughter. 42-year-old Gazelle Mansouri in a white jailhouse jumpsuit as she was put in handcuffs.
The death of the family matriarch.
Maria Mansouri, the body found under this tree on the Barona Indian Reservation.
Why did you do this to her? She didn't deserve this. She loved you. She gave her life to you.
The victim's daughter, Gazelle Mansouri, now charged with first-degree murder.
The murder that has rocked a close family. I talked to her and I saw no emotion.
Accused of killing her own mother.
That's a good picture of Nancy Grace, isn't it? Yeah, that's great. So this is my victim, and I remember this so well because I woke up one morning, this was all over the news. She was a very respected member of the community. She had been an Afghan refugee many, many years ago when the Russians rolled in 1978. She came with her husband, who was a former cabinet member of the Afghan government. They set up home in San Diego. She was well known in the Afghan community, and mysteriously, she went missing. This was so unusual, so out of character. The whole family were out there searching the canyons, putting out press releases, putting up flyers, except one person. The only person who didn't engage in any of these searches was their daughter. The family called in the police. It was because of one police officer that this case developed into a homicide quickly, and we were able to obtain evidence that otherwise would have been destroyed by the daughter. And I just can't say enough about this one young police officer, because he looked and he was shown things by the family, how the daughter, who was a meth addict, had turned the house, a beautiful house, into a dump, had invited drug addicts into her house. There she is. He went through the kitchen and he found on the kitchen table a notepad. He looked at it and he said, "Who wrote this?" And if you look at the very top, it talks about coping skills, tips on dealing with the bitch. The family said, "That's the daughter." And he said, "Who would ever refer to their mother as a bitch?" When he read this, and then when he found this second note, which was also written by the daughter, "Here am I going stir crazy, being cooped up here with the bitch, bugging me every 4.5 minutes." He immediately got on the phone with his superiors and said, "This is not a missing person. I believe this is a homicide." He had nothing to go on other than what he had read and what he was listening to, and he brought in the homicide team. This is the mother's bedroom, strewn with a jewelry box, the blue box in the foreground. Half the jewelry was missing. Every room was filthy except one. The guest bathroom was clean from top to bottom, and the officer described in trial how he walked in and was overwhelmed with the smell of bleach. The garage was full of stuff that the meth addict had brought in off the streets. By now, there was enough probable cause to get a search warrant. They seized the car that belonged to mother and daughter, and they removed it and took it to the police compound. They took everything out of the trunk, and they applied what you've seen on CSI, that chemical that lights up in blue when it comes into contact with human blood. This was human blood. They tested it for DNA. And how do you get DNA from somebody who's missing? You go and get her electric toothbrush from her bathroom. Extract DNA from the toothbrush, compare it to the DNA in the trunk. It matched. We knew that she had been murdered in her own house. Her body had been placed in the trunk and dumped somewhere in the county of San Diego. We did not know where. But inside the car, there was evidence that tells you a lot about what's been going on. There was a Walmart receipt. The night when mother went missing, the daughter went to Walmart, and what did she buy? Trash bags and bleach. She'd obviously placed her mother in trash bags, used the bleach in the bathroom to clear up the homicide scene. Inside the car was a gambling card belonging to the daughter. We had our investigators check the casino. Sure enough, at 4:45 the following morning after mother had gone missing, defendant daughter was at the casino. The casino is in a rural area in the county of San Diego, an area off the beaten track. Is that not an area that would be a perfect place to dump a body? So we focused our attention on that 4 or 5 mile radius around the casino. Inside the car was the laptop. We got another search warrant to open up the laptop and search. You learn so much from somebody's laptop. What do my forensic guys do first? They look at the Google searches. Somebody was Googling CSI info re bloodstains. When was the last time you Googled that? Homicide investigations. For a prosecutor like me, this was gold dust. I have to show you, though, where was she doing the Wi-Fi on the Google searches? Because she could say, well, anyone could have taken that laptop. Anyone could have used it. It was at McDonald's. Look at the last entry there. That's where the Wi-Fi connection was made at McDonald's. What does McDonald's have besides hamburgers? Video cameras. And there is my defendant sitting in the middle on the right side of the McDonald's there at the table with her laptop at this very moment. And you see the time, 17:35. That's when she was Googling CSI info and homicide investigations. And then 10 days later, we found mother's body 4 miles from the casino in a riverbed, a dried up riverbed, and unfortunately the coyotes had already got to her. Because of the decomposed condition of the body, the coroner could not tell us how mother had died. But what the coroner was absolute on was saying, this is a homicide. I can't tell you, members of the jury, how mother died, whether she was strangled, shot, stabbed, or poisoned. I don't know, but I can tell you this, it's a homicide. When you've got a coroner who's emphatic about that, it really boosts your case. She sat in court. She testified, and it was my privilege to give the closing argument. And because of the phenomenal work of the San Diego Police Department and the other family members, the jurors had no problem in convicting her of first-degree murder. Myth number 3, If an elderly victim gives the money voluntarily, I'm being told, Greenwood, where's the crime? This is consensual. Remember, theft is taking assets without permission. This is voluntary. We're not going to do any more investigation. I say, hold on. Don't be so quick. And this is an example. This article appeared in a California newspaper a few months ago. It was Adult Protective Services who called me so upset. They said, we want you to see what's been written by one of your colleagues up in the Central Valley of California. The crime involved a lady doing a scam. She was going door to door telling elderly people that she had just lost her 4-year-old son, and she needed money for burial and funeral and other expenses. At least 2 women, elderly women, felt sorry for her and gave her thousands of dollars. One of them gave $14,000 in checks, which she said were a loan. The police did a good job. They investigated this. They knew it was a scam. They sent it over to the district attorney. What was the district attorney's response? This appeared in a newspaper. If I hadn't have seen it in print, I wouldn't have believed it. But this is what the DA said. Simply getting scammed by a smooth-talking person is no crime. If money is freely, voluntarily given, donated, or gifted, there is no theft. Unless an older person lacks the mental capacity to give consent or undue influence is used to obtain it, elders are free to make gifts or donations to anyone they choose. So, for example, if you support that theory, anytime somebody calls you up and says that they're your grandson and they're in Colombia, South America, and they're in jail and they need you to send money to get them out of jail, according to this DA, You're free to do that. And if you do that voluntarily, it's not a crime. That's a huge misconception. To say simply getting scammed is no crime is pretty outrageous, isn't it? Do you find that you hear this said often? It's a civil matter? I hear it too often. It is pervasive. I've learned, as you've learned, that things are not always as they first appear. For example, take this beautiful tropical bird. What kind of bird do you think it is? Some kind of parrot, maybe? But you see, things aren't always how they first appear. Because as you look at it more closely, as you interrogate the pixels, as you uncover the evidence surrounding this bird, you realize it's not a bird. It's a lady. A lady sitting on a post. It must have been very uncomfortable for her, but it's a lady. Do you see her? Her leg comes down. That's her left toe, right at the bottom. Do you see her right knee? Do you see her left arm, and do you see her left elbow? That's her left elbow right there, coming down over her face. There's her right shoulder. Do you see her now? The longer you look at it, the longer you understand it, the context, you realize what it is. And you know what? When you go home this evening and they ask you, how was the keynote? You won't remember anything other than this slide. That's all you'll talk about. That's fine with me. Because it underlines a lesson for all of us, is don't just make assumptions based upon first impressions. And just because an elder gives money, quote, voluntarily, doesn't make it a civil matter only. I love it because some of you are still pointing it out to your friends who can't see it. I love that part. Because what I've learned is that there are times when what appears to be consensual has in fact been evaporated by either out-and-out lies, undue influence, or by taking advantage of the mental limitations of your victim. Take this, for example. On the left is my victim, on the right is her late husband, in the middle is the crook. Husband dies, victim has Parkinson's. Family agree she needs to sell the house and move into a retirement facility. She sells the house in San Diego and actually comes out on top. She has about $350,000 from the sale. That goes with her to the facility. There she meets Crook, who works in the facility. But the crook has never, ever met my victim's late husband. This photo is a fraud created by the crook because he sees a victim in waiting. He knows she has $350,000, and he says to himself, I want that money. How does he get it? One night when she's at dinner, he has a key to every single room. He walks into her room, removes the photograph from the mantelpiece, scans it, photoshops an image of himself into that, and creates this photograph. He then waits patiently for about 3 or 4 weeks until one afternoon he sees victim acting very confused in her state of Parkinson's. He strikes. He sits with her and he says, I knew it. I knew it. The moment you walked in, I thought I recognized you. And then he whips out the photograph. See, this is proof. I am your long-lost nephew. He convinces her. Now, he uses faith. He said, of all the facilities you could have come to, God ordained it that you should come to my facility. It was God's plan for you and I to be reunited. It's God's plan for me to take care of you for the rest of your life. It's God's plan that you should buy a condominium with your money and place it into joint names, and then we'll live happily ever after. And that's what they did. She used all her money. And you know, when you purchase realty and place it into joint names as joint tenants, the survivor takes. When the adult children from out of state heard about this arrangement, they became suspicious. They made a call to the police department, and through no fault of their own, but it's classic, the police said, no crime. This is a civil matter. Eventually, it came to our office. An investigator took the case and ran with it And when you start running with these cases, you uncover evidence. And he uncovered in her condo this photograph, and that blew open the whole case to the point where, before prelim even, the defendant pled guilty. Recently, I've been dealing with baby grand pianos. I didn't realize seniors own baby grands, and when they downsize, the first thing they want to get rid of is the baby grand piano. Have you ever tried to sell one? Impossible. So every single one of my elderly victims went to the same store and did what is called a consignment. They get 65% of the sale proceeds. The owner of the store gets 35%. And 19 victims gave their pianos to this fella over a period of 5 years. Not one of them ever received $1 from the sale because he kept making excuses as to why he hadn't sold their piano. Eventually, they got tired of it, and 3 of them realized, he ripped me off. He stole my piano. I'm a victim. I'm going to make a real crime report. So they went to the San Diego Police Department. What was the response? An email. This is from the San Diego Police Department. Mr. McGuire, this is all a civil issue, and the police department would not be able to assist. This was a business transaction involving a contract. So they were sent away. These victims did what I always tell my victims to do. And when that situation occurs, you know what I tell them to do? Call Don Dare. Because Don represents a medium that I can't reach. And that's exactly what they did in San Diego. And I thought I had this segment to show you, my Don Dare doesn't look anything like your Don Dare. Your Don Dare looks much better. But my Don Dare, I love that name. Wouldn't you like to be an investigative reporter called, "Hi, my name's Dare"? I love that. And this investigative reporter did a whole segment on the news at 10 at night. And that was the first I heard of it. And I immediately called him the next day. His name was Michael Turco. And I said, "Hey, Michael, this is amazing. You've got 19 elderly victims, and I don't know anything about it. Bring them to me." And he did. It was one of the easiest cases I ever put together. We charged 40 counts, felony counts, embezzlement and financial elder abuse. A case I just completed. It's called Garage Door Services. Don, where are you? He's over here somewhere. But anyway, if you're in the room, this is what I want you to go after. If you see him, this is what I want Don to investigate. Garage Door Services. They send technicians out. Have you ever been in a situation where your garage door hasn't worked? It always happens at the most inopportune times when you need to be somewhere 10 minutes ago, right? And you're in panic mode. What do? You look up the yellow pages, do you not? Garage Door Services is a registered corporation out of Dallas, Texas. They are all over the country. They are in Tennessee. And they are franchised. And they have spent thousands of dollars on putting ads in yellow pages and putting in very clever wordings so that they become the first name that you look up in Google. If you don't use yellow pages, use Google, and it might say something like Knoxville Garage Door Services, where you believe you're doing business with a very local operation. No. The Contractor State License Board got complaints from 9 elderly homeowners who believed they had been overcharged by this one technician. The board brought me the case, and I think they wondered whether I would file the case. But they gave me plenty of evidence and plenty of ammunition. And one of the 9 homeowners, she was 82. How much do you think she was charged for repairing her garage door spring? $4,300. You could get a brand new Buick for that. I mean, it'd be used. I was helped by this article because that's pretty good to get the leading trade magazine in America already talk about this. I charged the technician with 9 counts of residential burglary and with 9 counts of Elder Financial. And I put on every single victim. The beautiful thing was that none of them were on cruises. So they all came in. They all testified. And ultimately, the judge found sufficient evidence to bind over for trial. The defendant did not want to risk trial in front of a jury. And so he pled to 4 felony counts. And just last week, the same journalist wrote this national article, and I love it. He sends out the message loud and clear. What is also interesting is that GDS have got their Dallas, Texas lawyers to threaten to sue this journalist and probably me as well, because I'm very outspoken about the practices of GDS. I was also got a training tape from the team members in GDS, and you know what their motto is? Leave your conscience at home when you go to work. So watch out for GDS. Power of attorney doesn't give you the permission to steal and plunder. The first thing that suspects do when they have power of attorney, when there is an allegation of theft, when a police officer rolls up, the first thing that suspects in my county do is to brandish the power of attorney in front of the police officer's face and say, hey, I'm the power of attorney. And police officers typically back off when they are confronted with a power of attorney. But we should never close the investigation simply because somebody has power of attorney. It doesn't give you the freedom to simply spend money on yourself and purchase that 65-inch color TV from Costco or Best Buy for yourself, because that's what many of my suspects do when they have power of attorney, is buy that flat-screen TV. Also, family members who are powers of attorney, they legitimize spending the money on themselves because they're the only beneficiary. And that is what they say. Well, I was going to get the money anyway. But then I respond and saying, accelerated inheritance is not a defense to theft. What happens if we only discover the theft after the victim dies? I'm told we cannot prosecute. Because I'm told, and I was told early on in my career as a prosecutor, Greenwood, you need the victim. You need the victim to prove theft. If the victim's away in the military, overseas, we're not going to be able to prove the case. And that's not correct in every situation. Because I always say, treat the case like a murder. Do you need the victim alive to prove a homicide? No, we prosecute homicides all the time when the victim is dead. We don't rely on the victim to come in out of the death and say, that guy killed me. No, we prove that case using all kinds of evidence. That's how I want to approach these cases where the victim is already dead. There are situations when we don't need the victim alive to prove theft. For example, forgery. You can prove theft even when the victim is dead by comparing the known signature of the victim while they were alive with the check or the quitclaim deed or the power of attorney that was falsified by the defendants. Myth number 6. Home repair fraud. Do you ever get home repair fraud in Tennessee? You bet. Roofing repairs, driveway repairs, fencing repairs. Anytime there's a disaster, do you think the crooks come out of the woodwork? What's happening right now in Texas, in Florida? What's happening in Northern California and in Anaheim Hills? I tell you what, the crooks are migrating to these places in hordes. And it's scary. But it's also happening in your neck of the woods. Right now, there is an unlicensed, unqualified contractor right now ripping off one of your elderly homeowners in your town or your district. It's not a civil matter. We need to go after these guys, big time. Most of them are not qualified to do work. Most of them rip off other victims, and we need to find those victims through talking to Better Business Bureau, by researching small claims court indexes to see if they've been sued, by talking to our state contractors, investigators. You find out how much money did this guy get up front from the homeowner, what did he promise to do, and what did he actually do, and that's where you can prove a felony financial elder abuse. case. But unfortunately, sometimes the police don't get involved. One of my victims wrote this for me. He said they continued to work, called and complained. I spoke to him, the main suspect, and his wife. They kept making excuses. They changed their phone number. I gave them $26,000. In addition, they stored my belongings into a U-Haul, and now that's gone. $11,000. So he was out of pocket $37,000. I called the police, but they said it was a civil matter. One of my favorite cases was this. If you want to become a crook, this is what you should call yourself in Tennessee: Father and Daughter's Christian Construction Company. You've got a lot of churches in Tennessee. I've seen a lot of them over the last couple of days. And if you're a crook and you call yourself this, where do you put this flyer? In the church parking lot. And you drive up there at 10:15 during the 10 a.m. worship service. And you go out of your vehicle and you put this on the windshield of certain vehicles. You do not put it on the Ford F-150 pickup truck. That's a waste of paper. What do you put it on? See, thank you very much. It's the Buicks. It's the Camrys. And don't forget the 1992 Cadillac DeVille white exterior, tan interior. You know, as a crook, that is going to be owned by Agnes and Fred. And you will get a phone call. Why? Because you're a Christian. You're patriotic. And most of all, you're offering a discount. They can't resist that, can they? And Agnes, on the way home from church, will be reading this flyer while Fred's driving, and she'll say, "Fred, this is an answer to our prayer. Look, do you remember what we were talking about over waffles over breakfast? I said to you, we need to do something about the roof before we die because we don't want to leave this in disrepair for the kids. So this is our answer to prayer. God has already told us this is the guy we need to contact." I've seen it happen. So along comes Crook. He draws in my victim with a contract. Who was an English high school teacher, always taught me one thing. She said, "Paul, if you see a spelling mistake, it was probably done by a crook." And it's so true. There are so many mistakes in this contract. But they get your victim to sign a contract because they're hoping that if it ever becomes known to the police will look at it as a business transaction. It's not a business transaction. This is evidence of a fraud. He went into the kitchen. He got her to sign the contract. She didn't understand really, but she thought $1,300 was reasonable, so she gave him the check. He went rushing off to the bank at 9:15 in the morning, and look what happened. In the top left-hand corner, it says the bank called the customer. Because he came into the bank and he was big, he was loud, he was brazen, he was in a hurry. "Give me the money." He was rude. And they got very nervous and they called her and said, "Are you okay with us giving him the money?" "Fine," she said, "no problem. He's got his 3 workmen here, started the job, give him the money." She thought that was the total sum. I fast forward to 4 p.m. My victim is distraught. She's a widow. She's realized she hired the wrong people. Not only have they not done what they were supposed to do, they've actually damaged her existing property. But what do you do when you're a widow and you've got 4 guys in your home? You don't want to take them on. You just want them to leave, and you just want to say, "Okay, I've learned my lesson. I'll have to lose $1,300. But it got worse. He went into the kitchen with his workmen and stood over her and said, "Get your checkbook out." She said, "Well, I've already paid you." He said, "Oh, that was just for materials." See the memo line? "You owe me another $4,200 for labor." Right there and then, not only are they bad workmen, they're crooks. Now, what do? You're 82. You're living in Tennessee. You're in a house on your own, surrounded by 4 burly men in your kitchen. What do? She thinks logically. She thinks, "I'll write out the check because I don't want to get beaten up. They'll take it. While they're on the way to the bank, I'll call the bank, put a stop on the check, then I'll call the police to come and protect me because I know that once they get rejected by the bank, they'll be angry." William Petrie grabs the check and says, "Stay here," to his buddies because he knows what happened in the morning. He walks in at 4:15, same teller. He goes, "Oh my gosh, he's back." She looks at the amount and she thought, "Oh, this is wrong." She calls my victim, but this time my victim is different. She's literally shaking because she's got 3 burly men standing, staring at her in the kitchen. She's trembling. She's hesitating, and she finally says in a quiet voice, "Pay him." Reluctantly, the bank teller gives William Petrie the money. He then drives back, picks up his cronies, and they drive off. I want you to picture now the victim, because this could be happening right now in your jurisdiction. The victim is there at the kitchen table. She's crying. The phone is right there. And I will ask you the question, but I will answer it for you. Who do you think she calls? I'll tell you who she calls. She calls nobody. Why not? She's embarrassed. And that's the problem that we started with this morning. She's scared. She's embarrassed. So how on earth did I get this fantastic case? You tell me. The bank teller did what we are wanting them to do in Tennessee, which the law that you've just passed enables every single bank teller and credit union teller to do without fear of retribution or legal action against them for breaking someone's privacy. They pick up the phone and they call Adult Protective Services. What did APS do? They went over there the next morning, and APS has a knack of getting people to talk. The victim confided in APS. APS cross-reported to the local law enforcement, who did a bang-up job of investigating this guy and giving me the case. And it was one of the best moments of me in my career to be able to get this guy, William Petrie, a predator. But when she came in to testify against Petrie, she grabbed me by the arms and she looked me right in the eye and said, "Mr. Greenwood, I beg you, please do not tell my son." She was so afraid that he would find out. I said, "There's no need for him to find out. I won't tell him." The case I'm currently reviewing, I was reading on the plane here on Friday. Whoops. This is a statement made. Victim demanded her money back. The suspect told her it was his son's birthday. He didn't have time to discuss the roof. He demanded I leave. She went over. She was so angry, she went to his house. I love it. He said I was harassing him. I couldn't believe what he was saying. I told him I was going to go to the police and the DA's office. He just laughed at me. I left a small note on the car for the guy who was working with him to call me and discuss. I did now about going to the police, but they refused to help me. I'm sure they didn't do it in a nasty way, but they did it in a way that they felt that this was a business transaction. It's not a business transaction. This is clearly a suspect taking full advantage of an elderly homeowner. Suspects never call 911. Oh, yes, they do. I've found to my astonishment that so many suspects call 911, but very rarely do we spend the time to listen to the background noises on the 911 tape. This is a case where it wasn't the suspect who called, but in the background. Do you think that dispatcher needs some sensitivity training? Yeah. So that's what I do. Twice a year, I go to the Dispatcher Academy. One thing which I think maybe Tennessee you could do also, if you don't do it already, go and do training for dispatchers on what to look for, what to ask whenever an elderly person is on the phone, okay? That's a great method. Secondly, paramedics. I've discovered over my 21 years of doing these cases and doing these trials, paramedics are key to a conviction. And why is that? Because we're living in difficult times where many potential jurors have an immediate bias against what I do and against what police officers do. And we need witnesses who have absolute credibility in everybody's eyes. Have you ever met anyone who says a bad thing about paramedics? I haven't. Because what is the job description of an EMT? It's to save lives, isn't it? And most EMTs and paramedics in Tennessee are cross-trained not only to save lives in physical medical conditions, but to actually help with fires too. And even rescue cats out of trees. So I want to have on my witness list a paramedic. How do I get that paramedic? They have to be trained. I do believe that every single paramedic in Tennessee should get training in elder abuse awareness. Why is that? Because often they're the first person on scene, even before any police or deputy sheriff gets there. They hear and see things that nobody else will see. We've just discovered that in the back of the wagon, there's now video and audio tape cameras. We are now capturing on tape the conversation between paramedic and victim. Because I tell you what, victim is more likely to tell paramedic what happened than a uniformed, gun-toting police officer at the hospital. Because paramedics get the truth out of the victim. Who did this to you? How did this happen? And they will tell the truth. They make great witnesses. Why do they make great witnesses? Because of what I've already told you. They're heroes. But also because most paramedics are men. And when I bring in my paramedic male, I happen to believe that when God creates these men, He never creates them ugly. It's true. They all look like Denzel Washington and George Clooney. I challenge you to bring in an ugly Knoxville paramedic. I don't believe he exists. So when he comes in a dark blue uniform, it's over for the defendant, because I have at least 6 females on my jury, and I love to watch them as he walks in. They go weak at the knees. I see it all the time. This is an example of why we need training for paramedics. The suspect caregiver, a man, called and said, I think she's dead. The paramedic and the police officer rolled up. They didn't see anything wrong. They removed the blue blanket, but they said, no, nothing wrong here, we need to leave. So they left. The mortuary came and picked up the dead body. At the mortuary, they uncovered the diaper. What did they find? Diaper number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 diapers later. Stage 4 decubitus ulcer. Police officers in San Diego, they never give me Denzel Washington's name. They only say Engine 12. That's got to stop. I keep telling police officers, please give me Denzel Washington's phone number, give me his name. I want to interview him because while it's fresh in his mind. Because by the time the police officer gets to the hospital, where is the paramedic? I'll tell you where he is. He's already on I-40 West, going to the next call. Elderly people die from natural causes. That's why it's important in Nashville, in Knoxville, to have elder death review teams, and in Memphis, who review suspicious deaths. Why is that true? Because I found over my 21 years that there are many opportunities for people to kill elders and get away with it, under the radar. To learn from Dr. Shipman from England, who was a medical doctor who killed in excess of 350 elderly female patients. Charles Cullen in New Jersey. This is Dr. Shipman. He murdered his victims by going to their homes and injecting them with lethal amounts of morphine. Why did he do that? He was actually forging wills and codicils, adding his name as a beneficiary, so when they died, he inherited. He did this for 19 years and got away with it. Charles Cullen, we believe, murdered over 40 elderly patients in hospitals in Philadelphia and New Jersey. This guy killed 28 in a German hospital. He was a nurse. These two killed elderly, drunk men on Skid Row in Los Angeles, took them home after befriending them, purchased life policies on their lives, kept them alive for 2 years, and then took them back to Skid Row and ran them over with their cars and cashed in the life policies. This lady killed 10 in Texas. We need to train coroners and their medical examiner investigators so that when they get a call from a home, from a facility, they shouldn't automatically assume that because the person is elderly, therefore it's a natural death. We've trained our medical examiner's office to, before they invoke what they call a waiver jurisdiction so that they don't take the body for an autopsy, before they do that, they always have to check with Adult Protective Services to see if the decedent is known to Adult Protective Services as being a victim of some form of elder abuse or neglect in the previous 5 years. If they are, they'll flag it and they'll look at the death further. I call it the anyway excuse. People tell me, Greenwood, come on, calm down. There are more important cases out there. And I say, you know what? These cases are as important as any other case you're investigating. I'm told the victim was going to die anyway, or that the suspect was going to inherit anyway. And the final myth I talk about is, hey, Greenwood, it's a scam, but hey, the suspect is not in this jurisdiction, the crime didn't occur here, so we can't do anything about it. That's wrong. I want them to document it, I want them to bring it to us in whatever shape or form, and let us figure out if there is a way that we can ultimately identify who scammed our victim in Tennessee, and whether or not there's a chance to bring that suspect back from wherever they live. A few months ago, I got this email. Started off by saying, I am a retired Catholic priest. This fellow was 80, and he was the victim of the Publishers Clearinghouse scam. He lost $41,000. I went to my office and I said, you know what? I can't send him to the police department because they won't deal with it. Can we investigate it? They allowed me to do it. I had an investigator who did a brilliant job. He did search warrants on the money. It was, fortunately for us, it was transferred to a Wells Fargo account. This is the suspect. This was taken in Greenville, South Carolina, when he withdrew the $41,000. He had opened that account 3 days earlier with a false name and Social Security. So we didn't know who he was, except for one thing. We knew what he looked like. There was something very prominent about him. Look at his neck. And my investigator didn't give up. He sent this photo to every single law enforcement agency within a 50-mile radius of Greenville and said, do you recognize this guy? A week later, a booking photo from a detective who had just booked this guy a few days earlier. We extradited him. Then I said to my victim, you know what? If I go to the mobile home park and tell about the scam, they won't listen to me. But if you go on and do it, they'll listen to you. I said, by the way, can you wear your clergy collar? He said, absolutely not. I won't do it. I'm too embarrassed. I left it a week. I called him again. I asked again. And this time, he said yes.
I got a letter from Publishers Clearinghouse one day.
We don't have time, but that was fantastic. Okay, the importance of the 3 C's. I'm a great believer in this: collaboration, cooperation, and communication. Today is an example of what you're already doing in East Tennessee and throughout the state of Tennessee, thanks to all these different collaborations. Elder Watch, AAAs, AARP, law enforcement, police departments, district attorneys. It's phenomenal. But this is the only way it works. And I found that the key to success is doing these meetings at lunchtime, offering free food. At 11:30, you will get police officers every time. It's great. You've got to build the bridges with bringing in all these folks. APS, we've got to give them the tools. We've got to give them the publicity, build posters. So we did a campaign called Silence Isn't Golden. It's proved very successful, but the downside is nobody's giving APS any more staff to deal with the extra calls. And that's why I'm constantly beating the drum, saying, get us more budget money for APS. We use red for physical, we use green for financial, and we use blue for neglect. I'm so encouraged by spending time with your prosecutors in Tennessee. You've got some phenomenal prosecutors here. They get it, they understand it, and they're doing these cases now. And last December, they allowed me to come to the Tennessee District Attorneys Association. They had me there for 2 hours, and I was able to share with them what I'm sharing with you. And it's phenomenal what's going on. So you should be very proud of what your prosecutors are doing out here. We've got to build a public awareness. You do it through Rotary clubs. You do it through speaking to the police counter personnel, the dispatchers, the credit unions, the banks, the pharmacies who are seeing prescription drugs being renewed very quickly, or where the prescription drugs are not being renewed. Red flags that pharmacists should be trained to look for, and then to be in touch with the primary care physician of the elderly person saying, hey, I'm worried about what's going on here. We need to train clergy what to look for. What's the first thing I talked about this morning? Isolation. That's what the suspect does. They will make sure that the victim does not go to the place of worship that they have attended for the last 45 years. And finally, we talk about the types of elder abuse. Physical abuse. You know, you don't need to even describe what goes on here. You can see it. This was a case that was captured on video. Here's the victim coming up, and the suspect was causing a nuisance. The security guard actually was on the phone with police. This is outside a senior housing facility. So how did that go down? This is the actual view from the other angle. So there's the security guard, who was a great witness, on the phone with police, even before the crime occurred, asking for the police to be there. There's the victim coming through. Why is this important? He turned around. He could see that my victim was elderly, and that's something I have to prove, is that he knew she was elderly. Bam. She could have fractured her skull, she could have broken her hip, all manner of injuries. Mental, emotional suffering. I just want to cue this up before I play it. My victim there in the bed is 101. She cannot speak. She's had a stroke. She's paralyzed. The family brought in paid caregivers from an agency. After they did so, they noticed that mother became very anguished. She was very restless. They didn't know why, so they installed hidden cameras. The hidden cameras tell a story. They found out that these two paid male caregivers were in a homosexual relationship with one another and were actually performing sex acts on one another while they were supposedly taking care of elderly mother. She came from a very puritanical, conservative background. Any outward exhibition of nudity or sexual promiscuity was abhorrent to her and really upset her. And the only way she could communicate that was by doing with her left arm, by raising it. So this is what happened. He's caressing the penis of the other guy, and she sees it. She raises her left arm, and all they do is turn around and laugh. We had 3 hours of this videotape testimony. Ultimately, after this, the judge found enough to send to trial. These two defendants pled guilty before trial of inflicting mental abuse. Sexual abuse, it goes on. But so often it goes on in facilities where the crime reporting is delayed. But occasionally, thanks to DNA, we get success. Most of these assaults do occur in nursing homes. CNN in February launched this massive story about sexual abuse that is going undetected, uninvestigated, and unprosecuted. It's shocking. And we need to do a better job in California and in Tennessee about uncovering these crimes in these facilities. CNN calls it a widespread issue. They also call it, in the Star newspaper, America's Hidden Horror. It's an untracked issue. So tackling crimes in long-term care facilities has become one of my new challenges that I've been devoting a lot of time to in the last 2 years. In California, we called it a shattered system, how to reform long-term care. And it's a challenge for us to bring together various state agencies that oversee administratively what goes on in facilities. We're gradually doing it through the help of Ombudsman, APS, police, our office, the Attorney General's office, state agencies, and local hospital discharge planners. These are key people in the whole scenario with elder abuse awareness. Neglect. Some serious cases. You end up with cases of victims who are malnourished, semi-comatose, dehydrated. And I'm not going to dwell on this because I know I'm 15 minutes from your lunch, but I always end up with this kind of stuff before lunch, and I apologize. Stage 4 is the worst. And that's what I always turn my attention to, stage 4 pressure sores. Are these avoidable, stage 4? Yes. In most cases, they are avoidable. They're treatable, as long as you treat them early. Stage 1, half of you, because you didn't get up and go to the restroom, because you've been listening to me for 2.5 hours, you have a stage 1 already. So I'm not going to be interested in stage 1, stage 2, and sometimes I will in stage 3, but stage 4, yes, my radar is on. We need to know from hospitals if any patient comes in with a stage 4 pressure sore, because that could be criminal. You look for victims who are dehydrated and malnourished. You look for neglect of feet. And then you look for indicators of financial exploitation, along with the neglect. In most cases of neglect, you get instances and evidence that the suspect caregiver has also taken control of the victim's assets. Anticipate some defenses. At least I was doing something, nobody else bothered. The patient hated doctors. She didn't let me get help for her. Or his religious beliefs got in the way. He was a Christian Scientist. He didn't believe in medical help. Forced imprisonment. This was a vulnerable adult in her 40s, African-American gal, was placed in the chair by the caregiver who then decided to leave, leaving my victim without a means of escape because she was a paraplegic. She called out for help. This was with a shower going on. Nobody heard her because of the shower. She lived on the second floor apartment. You know what she did? She spent 3.5 hours shifting her body weight. That's the only thing she could do. And finally, one of those gauze wrappings dropped off and floated down into the drain. She waited another 5.5 hours for the lip of the drain there to fill up and spill out into the living area. And finally, a damp patch formed on the first floor ceiling below. He, the tenant below, called the maintenance, and they then went to the second floor apartment and rescued my victim. The suspect caregiver had abandoned her. Why? Because she stole her jewelry, her checkbook, and her cash. There's my victim. My detective did a phenomenal job of rescuing the jewelry from the pawn shop, and you can tell from her body language, she's not going to let anyone get anywhere near that jewelry. A case that I'm currently prosecuting. My victim is a grandmother. She was held prisoner in her own house by her grandson. Eventually, she managed to get an iPad and scribble a note on an email to her daughter saying, "Help, get me to the hospital." That's all she could write, and she sent it by email at 5:30 in the morning. The daughter receives it. She calls 911. Paramedics show up. As they walk up the front path, they notice these cartridges littered across the pathway. It later turned out that he was inhaling these things. As they got closer to the house, they saw the wheelchair thrown out, abandoned in a heap. At first, the suspect grandson refused entry, but the deputy sheriff arrived, and the deputy sheriff, I loved it, didn't want to have any nonsense. He believed that the suspect was obstructing of justice because they needed to get in and check the welfare of the grandma, and so he hooked him up, which is the best thing he could have done. They went in. I want you to look at the dining room table and there's something under the dining room table. And I'll show you what is there. This is what was under the dining room table. Have you ever seen one of these before? It's an incendiary explosive device that the grandson had built. They x-rayed it. Do you see what's inside? Nails. This was a very rudimentary nail bomb. And there's my victim. She had been imprisoned for weeks by her grandson, who terrorized her and did other things. Case I'm prosecuting tomorrow. That's why I have to unfortunately rush off after I finish, because this case I just issued last week and I'm prosecuting it tomorrow. The daughter drove this truck over to a casino called the Hollywood Casino in San Diego. The video cameras on the parking structure recorded her entering the structure at 8:42 p.m. At 4:43 a.m. the next morning, that's about 8 hours, security are and they see this truck and they notice something unusual. The 84-year-old advanced dementia mother is curled up in the truck, and she had managed to get a rag stuffed into her mouth, and she was gagging. That's the rag that was in her mouth. The paramedics smashed the windows and got into the back because the truck was locked, and managed to get the victim, who was in very poor shape, to the hospital. So I've charged the daughter with neglect and false imprisonment of her mother. She was found in the casino at 4:45 in the morning, still playing the slot machines. Financial exploitation, very quickly, in the last few minutes. I want you to know that this is a huge problem. 65% of all my cases involve some form of financial exploitation. I've already given you some of the misconceptions that provide a barrier to successful prosecution. But there's enough of the evidence out there. It's now being called, an article appeared yesterday, financial abuse is now officially a U.S. public health concern. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control might be best known for its efforts to combat obesity. The flu here it drew new, sound like a disease at all. The hazard is senior financial abuse. The Center for Disease Control is recognizing that this is impacting the health of so many seniors in our country. This is now a health crisis. So we need to watch for an explosion of these cases. When you see a photo like this, what does it tell you? It tells you a lot. You see a victim, who may be lonely, who may be depressed, who is clearly a victim because of what is shown in the foreground. Evidence of scams, of frauds she's a victim of. She's probably sent checks, credit card numbers to all these people. These institute. I like because that reminds me what I've been dealing with for 21 years. People have assets, and I've noticed that there are hands reaching in to grab those assets. Those hands can represent the most surprising type of people. That could be, for example, a Methodist choir director, because I prosecuted him. It's a great case. And you know where the detective arrested him? Where's a great place to arrest a Methodist choir director? At the Methodist choir practice on a Thursday night in front of all those senior ladies in the choir. By doing that, putting handcuffs on him, 3 more victims came forward at the choir practice. He exploited them for when Hurricane Katrina was a problem, and he said that he was bringing refugees from Katrina to San Diego, and he needed money. Crooks use all method of scams, and this is one where my crooks posed as FBI agents. They even produced a business card with a false name and a phone number with a voicemail on it. When we arrested him, we did a search warrant on his house. I love it. to show how stupid crooks are. He had to do a which said, "We're with the FBI, flash the badge." Now, what I'm going to do in my last couple of minutes, I'm just going to fast forward to, hey, wake up. Oi! I've blown your cover. I need to, oh, here we are. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the very end here. You know what I always are telling judges, and what I need to tell and remind myself about, the impact of these crimes on victims, financially, emotionally, and in so many other ways. It devastates them. And I don't have research on it, but I do believe that in some cases my victims died a premature death as a result of a broken heart. Unfortunately, there are cases of suicide. Out of England last year, they reported 4 suicides after the victim discovered they had fallen foul of a pension fund scam. Photos demonstrate more clearly than words the impact of a crime against a victim. Look at her here, before she became a victim of financial exploitation. Look at her a year later. Loses weight, loses her smile, becomes depressed. Finally, what resources are available to you? Many. I really recommend that you look at is the National Center for Elder Abuse, based out of the University of Southern California. Great resource, great website. They will put you in touch with so many different resources around the country. And secondly, the Justice Initiative out of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. Bob Bancarter this afternoon, who you will really enjoy, will tell you what's going on in D.C., and it will surprise you what's going on. One of the best things that has come out of D.C. in the last 3 or 4 years is the Justice Initiative. In webinars. It's one of the webinars they're doing next Monday. Yes. Collecting evidence in cases of elder physical abuse and caregiver neglect. Next Monday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please, if you're able to, if you have a desktop computer or a laptop, you can log in, you can register. Just go to the Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative and be educated through this medium. It's a detective out of Anaheim and a deputy city attorney out of Anaheim presenting this hour-long program. This poster says it, and I like it. It says physical abuse, mental, sexual abuse, which will today in your neighborhood. I hope that today you will realize that this is a perfect step, a stepping stone. Abuse emerge from the shadows. The message that I always bring to seniors, wherever I speak, of passion. Thank you for your passion in what you do, in how you do it. Thank you for the purpose that you bring to the job every single day. And thank you for your perseverance, because for many of us, it's not always easy. You're going to get rejections. You're going to get disappointments. Keep persevering, because it's amazing what we can achieve when we apply those 3 Ps to our work. So with that, I'm going to leave you my contact information. If you'd like this outline, I'm going to post it on the website with the Eastern Tennessee, so you better go there and get it from their web, minus the photos and stuff. Material right there. And if I can help you with a case of elder abuse that you're battling with, to email me. You've got a wonderful audience. Thank you for staying with me for so long. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. And you can tell the passion. You can tell the passion. Since 2008, when these programs were first started, as you heard, there have been some laws enacted. One of those laws has to do with the scams, and one of those scams has to do with If it happens to you over and over and over again, it's got to be a scam. Here in Tennessee, we have a law right now that says if the contractor doesn't complete the job within 90 days, it just stops, the person can file a felony lawsuit against that person. You have to write a note to them, give them 90 days. But thanks to some of our Knoxville police officers who are here today, that's enacted. We're going to do a story on it tomorrow, by the way, one of the first cases that is going to go to court. So we have some rules right now in the state of Tennessee, particularly here in Knoxville, that protect the elderly. Some of these other issues are still in developmental stages. And Paul, thank you so much. And he is going to be here throughout the day. Is that correct? No. He has to go. When do you leave? In about an hour, so you have an hour to talk to Paul, if you will. Okay, we're going to have lunch, but before lunch, we have the lucky drawings. Would you take out your little